everyone, welcome back to my channel, The Knits. My name is Amy, and here I love to talk about all things knitting, and this is podcast episode number 51, where I'll be sharing what I've been knitting for the past few weeks. If you're new here, welcome to my channel. I am a knitter based out of Boston. I've been knitting for most of my life and just really enjoy talking about my knitting projects, reviewing projects and yarn here on this channel, and today I have a regularly scheduled podcast where I go through if I have any finished projects to share. I'll talk about my current projects on the needles, and we'll also be sharing any new yarn or future project plans that I have. It's actually been 3 weeks since I last filmed. I usually film these podcasts every 2 weeks, so there's a lot to cover today. If you haven't seen my most recent video, it was a weekend vlog where I took you through a whole weekend, and it involved a lot of progress on my knitting projects, and it might have given you a glimpse of what a regular weekend looks like for me. We are certainly deep in the throes of winter here. It's been, I don't think it's really been above freezing in the past 2 weeks. We had a snowstorm last weekend that immediately turned to ice, and the ice is still there. It's like barely melting. So I've been really enjoying my days spending it cozy indoors, working on lots of knitting projects and dreaming about all the sweaters that I want to knit. So I actually don't have any finished objects today to share, but I'll talk about quickly what I'm wearing. This is my Lana vest. It's a hand knit vest that I knit, I think 2 years ago, and it's one of my favorites. I knit this out of the Originally Lovely Lana yarn, which is funny that both the pattern and the yarn had the same name, but no relation. The yarn by Originally Lovely is a 100% Andean Highland wool. This is in the color Merlot, and the pattern is by Irene Lynn. It features all these beautiful cables and texture. I love it. It's also in one of my favorite colors to wear. I also realized in the previous podcast I didn't address that I have a little bit of a different setup. If you are a returning viewer, you might know I've kind of been playing around with different filming setups. We've kind of been moving stuff around in the craft room. I did actually get a new storage unit for the craft room, which has been super helpful. This yarn shelf has been with me for a while, so it's not new to the channel, but I had a great Facebook Marketplace find local to me where this cabinet was available. Someone wanted to get rid of theirs, so I needed some extra storage, not for yarn, but actually for like filming equipment and just like notions and some other things that I just use and didn't really have a spot for, as well as projects. I feel like I never really had a good location for projects, and so my little project bags would kind of just perpetually live on our couch or on like our coffee table or on the floor, and I just really wanted a place where I could put my projects in addition to having storage for yarn and filming equipment and other things. So this has been a great addition to the craft room, and I kind of like the filming angle at this corner a little bit better than where I was in the previous podcast, which was like flat up against here. So of course, always subject to change. I'm always experimenting, and a lot of times when I edit videos, I don't really realize if I like disliked a setup or disliked the lighting until after I've already filmed it all. So I tend to change things incrementally, as you can see today. But enough chatter about that. Let's get into my knitting projects. My first project is a pair of socks that was really close to being finished for today's episode, but I just didn't finish them in time, so they're technically still a whip, and these are the Harriet Socks. The Harriet Socks are a pattern by Summer Lee. I really love Summer Lee's pattern designs, and I actually have her book called The Sock Project, which has 25 patterns, and this is actually one of the first patterns I've made from the book. The Harriet Socks are a cuff-down sock that feature a very simple cable that runs down the leg of the foot and then sort of divides out into a single cable down the foot, and it's the same on the other side. The rest is all stockinette. I really enjoyed the sock. It was like a little bit more exciting than a vanilla sock, but nothing too complicated where it felt like a lot of effort to knit. It was a quick pattern to memorize and just a really enjoyable knit so far. So I did finish the first sock, and I'm just really close to finishing the second sock. I actually just finished where I am starting the toe. I just haven't started the toe yet, so here we are. The beautiful bright red yarn that I'm using for this project is Knit Pick Stroll. The label was not staying on that ball, but Knit Pick Stroll is Knit Pick sock yarn. I've heard great things about it. It's a 4-ply sock yarn, which is one of my favorites, a 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon blend. Comes in a wide variety of solids. They even have some tweed colors as well, and my first time trying it, but I really enjoyed it. I feel like it's just a very soft and smooth yarn. It was like really enjoyable to have on my needles. I didn't really encounter any issues with the cabling, like it wasn't splitty, and just overall creates like a really beautiful solid texture for a sock. This is in the color Strawberry Fields, which is just a really nice bright red. Really thought it was a good color to pick for this somewhat basic sock, and I bought just one 50-gram ball of this, so I'm getting the pair of socks out of just the one ball. So I had to do kind of a shorty sock, and I might be playing yarn chicken because when I finished this first sock, I measured it and it was on my scale. It was exactly 25 grams, and then I weighed the rest of my yarn and there was exactly like 25 or 26 grams. So hopefully I don't have any issues when I get down to the toe, but I still have to do the toe and I have this much left. So I feel like we're doing well. I don't think there's going to be any catastrophe here with the amount of yarn, but this for me was the length of sock that I could get for having 2 socks with 50 grams. I am making adult size medium in the pattern, which has a 62 stitch circumference. For me, my socks, I kind of like them with like either a 60 to 64 stitch circumference on US 1 or 2.25 millimeter needles. So we'll definitely be finishing these up this weekend. Really excited to wear them and see how this yarn wears. Although Stroll was like a really enjoyable yarn to knit with, it is very soft, which gives me pause because I know really soft yarns have a higher tendency to pill, and I feel like I can already see with this first sock here just a little bit of fuzziness being created along like the top of the leg that has had the most like friction as I worked it cuff down, and the leg would sort of like hit things as I was knitting it, which is like pretty normal for knitting projects. I'm just curious if this yarn is going to pill a lot or maybe show a lot of wear simply because it is so soft. So I'll keep you posted on that. Summer Lee has great sock pattern designs. I knit a lot of her patterns and hope to knit a lot more in the future. I have been asked who my favorite sock designers are, and a lot of people have asked me specifically because they've had issues with their socks not fitting right with certain designers, and it made me think because I realized that I pick my sock patterns to knit not really based off of how I think they'll fit my feet. I really just pick sock patterns based on the design, and as someone who's knit a good handful of socks and has sort of grown to understand what fits my feet well, of course I had that whole exercise with the custom fit socks book that also taught me a lot about sock fit. I really don't pick my sock designers or patterns based off of how those sock designers construct their sock, and I will sort of apply my own construction to sock designs. So for example, this pattern from Summer Lee, you know, it was cuff down, heel flap, and gusset, but I didn't really follow her exact instructions for the heel flap and gusset because I know from experience how I like to knit my heel flap and gusset, so that way they fit my feet well. Also, if I were to knit a sock pattern that had a heel construction that I didn't really love, like a short row heel, I'm not a big fan of for my feet, so I would probably still use those sock patterns to knit the sock and then just put in my own heel flap and gusset construction that I like. So to answer the question of like sock pattern designers that have good fit, I think that's such a hard answer because everyone's feet are so dramatically different in proportion and size, and a lot of sock designs will usually just go based off of a pretty basic sock construction that usually will have like an 8 or 4 divisible stitch count. Of course, that's not everybody, but if you're struggling with sock fit, I would just recommend trying different constructions, which you can find in resources like the Sock Project, or the internet has, of course, there's a ton of stuff on the internet for different types of heels, or just play around with like if you're knitting a heel flap and gusset, make the heel flap longer if you think you need more room in the heel, or if your heels are too loose, make the heel flap shorter so that way your overall heel is a little bit smaller. So I would just recommend trial and error, which might be frustrating in the knitting world because knitting is a slow craft and it takes a while to knit something up just to try it out and find out that it doesn't really fit. But my recommendation for sock designs, I don't really have a great one for designers or patterns that I know will fit everybody because I think that's an impossible task. But if you really love a sock design but don't really love how that sock was constructed, I think there are ways to sort of apply the same design from the pattern into a construction that you find over time works best for you. My next work in progress is my Ingrid Sweater by Petite Knit. I am so close to finishing this, which is making me very excited. If you haven't been here for my Ingrid Sweater journey, this has just been a long project that I'm really excited to move on from and get off my needles. I really enjoyed the sort of style of it and the construction, and I know I'm gonna love wearing it. I cast this on last summer, and I think it just, I don't know, it drew itself out. I had some issues with the sleeves, and I just want to be done with it. I don't dislike it enough to frog it, because obviously I've come this far, but I've been really forcing myself to move along on the sleeves so I can block this and call it a finished object. The Ingrid Sweater is a worsted weight knit, and I believe the recommended yarn is a DK weight wool held with a lace weight silk mohair. I opted not to do any mohair for mine because I really wanted kind of a crisp stitch definition for the texture pattern, and I ended up using Valley Yarns Northampton. This is from Webb's, and this is a 100% wool yarn, non-superwash. There are 247 yards in 100 grams here. This color is Ocean Heather, which is a beautiful tealy blue. I really love this color. I can see myself knitting a lot of projects in the future with it. And I think last time we spoke, I was done with the first sleeve, or maybe I was in the middle of the first sleeve and talked about how I didn't really like how Petite Knit wrote in the pattern how to do the sleeve decreases, which was with very little instruction at all, so it was kind of up to the knitter to figure out how to incorporate decreases into the stitch patterns without interrupting the stitch patterns. And there really is no way to do it without interrupting the stitch pattern, so I ended up with what kind of looks wonky if you look really closely, but if you don't look really closely, you can't even tell. This is on the underside of the sleeve, so no one is really going to see this, but for me it was just a mental block where I really don't like doing a lot of figuring things out as I knit my projects, hence why I really don't have any interest in designing patterns ever. I really just like making the thing, so I expect a pattern to have most things pretty clear. I kind of go back and forth because I'm not someone who needs a pattern that has a lot of fluff added into it, just because I've been knitting for so long, and sometimes I find patterns with a lot of extra help to be too annoying to read, if I can say that, but this, without giving like proper direction on how to continue the pattern with the decreases, I just didn't really love. So I know a lot of people talk about that with the Ingrid Sweater, so I would give pause if you are the same way as me and don't want to figure things out. Maybe don't try out this pattern. But the second sleeve has been going pretty well. I think I learned a lot from the first sleeve, so the second sleeve should go by a little bit more smoothly. I do have a little row counter here, so I know exactly on what round to do my decreases, and I'm just gonna accept the fact that it's gonna look a little bit wonky on the underside of the sleeve, so that is that. It's been a while since I talked about my modifications to this sweater as well. I opted to do just a plain 1x1 ribbed folded collar because I didn't really like the look of Petite Knit's collar with the different ribs and the eyelets, and it wasn't folded, so I think this looks really crisp. I just knit the 1x1 rib, and then I always do the bind off as the last round to the inside to sew it down. I don't really like sewing it on at the end, and it usually ends up pretty stretchy. And I did also modify the length of the body of the sweater because I knew that the given length in the pattern was going to be too long for me. So that mostly involved chopping the lattice section down here in half. If you see Petite Knit's photo, she'll actually have you do the lattice portion maybe 2 or 2.5 times. And I just did it once. And then I think I also modified a couple other lengths of the sections to be a little bit shorter here and there. So those notes will all be in my Ravelry page. I can't remember if they're like currently there or if I'll put them in later. I might put them in later, but I'm hoping for overall a sweater that is not super long, because I've seen people who have like similar proportions to me. I'm only 5 feet tall, and they make the Ingrid Sweater in the size extra small, which is the smallest size in the pattern, and that's the size I'm making, and it just looks like very large on them. So I was hoping to counteract that largeness by using those modifications. And same with the sleeve length. I think this lattice section here was also supposed to be done 2 times, but I chopped it in half to give myself a shorter sleeve that hopefully is not ridiculously long on me. This is one of those patterns that's going to change dramatically with blocking. You can see with all of the ribbing, it's just really cinching in different places. But trying it on now, it seems like it fits pretty well. Of course, I'm expecting a lot of growth with the width of the body, which will therefore lengthen the sleeves, and you can see here, like the sleeves have a lot of cinching that will all go away when it's blocked. So I'm really excited to block this when it's all finished to have a perfectly even and flat sweater to share. So I'm planning on wrapping up this project this weekend as well. Today's Friday, so really excited to power through this, move on from it, and then put in some effort into some projects that I've been really excited to knit, including the next one that I'll share. So my next project is the Traveler Hoodie by Andrea Mowry. I have been obsessed with this project. It's taking a lot of effort to not work on it all the time. And I'm kind of surprised because there's a lot of different stuff going on here, a lot of different portions that I could see as like being annoying and maybe wanting me to put this aside, but I just can't stop knitting this project. The Traveler Hoodie is a sport weight pattern, and the yarn that I'm using is Knit Picks High Desert Sport. This is a 100% American wool yarn. This is in the color Ponderosa Heather, which is this beautiful olive green color. I've really been enjoying working with this yarn so far. It has a really tight twist, it's really springy, and it's just really enjoyable to knit. I will say I did have one issue with just one skein so far. I found 2 knots like right at the end of the skein, so the knotted sections were like really short in between, which was like super annoying because I broke the knot out and then like reattached the yarn without the knot, and then I knit just a couple rounds and then there was another knot, and I was like, wow, that is so frustrating. At this point, I think I have 4 skeins in here, so 1 out of 4. I don't know if that's a good rate of not or not for quality control, but besides that, I have no complaints for this yarn. So hopefully I don't encounter the same thing with the rest of the skeins. I did buy 7 skeins of that yarn for this sweater. For the hoodie, it takes a lot of yarn. The estimated yarn requirements were pretty high, which I'm assuming is because of the hood. So I was really curious to see how much yarn the hood would take up. So I did weigh the project before I started the hood, and then I'll weigh it after just to get an idea of how much yarn the hood uses. It's a pretty big hood. It definitely seems larger than like a beanie. And usually beanies are like 100 grams of yarn, give or take, so I'm imagining this will be like more than an entire skein just in the hood. But let's backtrack a little bit to the construction of the sweater. Last time on the podcast, I had not finished the front and back panels, but I had since done that. The front panel is shaped with short rows to give this sort of angle here. If you can see where those garter ridges kind of disappear, that's from the short rows. And there, of course, was also shaping for the front neckline, which is kind of hard to see now that I've cast on for the hood, but it kind of made like a really nice curve. And you do the same for the back without shaping for the front neckline, so you do short rows as well, which you can see here probably a bit more clearly. And then when you finish both the front and back panel, they're separate. So then you connect them with a 3-needle bind off, which I thought looked really good. It looks really crispy and was really fun to do. And it has a lot of structure too. Like this fabric is pretty stretchy. Like you can see how far the fabric stretches, but with the 3-needle bind off, this is like as far as it stretches. So it's certainly going to give a lot of structural integrity to the drop shoulder, which is a really good thing, I think. Also, once you finish the front and back panels, you do have to go back and stitch up the underarm, which is totally new to me. And that's because you cast on, you can see here, there's like a very obvious cast on point for both the front and back panels. This is something I've never done with a drop shoulder design before, so I am curious to see how that affects the final fit. Usually with drop shoulders, you don't really have this excess, and it's just kind of knit straight, and then you pick up for the sleeves, but you have this here, so part of the sleeve length is already created with this extra fabric that, since it's knit flat, you'll have to do just a quick little seam up the underarm. I am knitting the second size of this pattern for myself, which is the recommended size based off of my bust circumference and the pattern. It'll give me about 10 inches of positive ease, and I'm also following the pattern directions for the lengths of everything. Andrea Mowry wears hers pretty cropped, and I kind of wanted a same cropped look on me, so I followed the pattern directions for the body length. And similarly to the Ingrid, I'm expecting a lot of growth with blocking here, especially with this stitch pattern. I mean, it's just an accordion. This will also be a really cool blocking transformation that I will definitely document so you can see how much that this pattern grows, because right now if I try this on, it's definitely too short for comfort, but I'm not really worried about it because I know that it'll gain a lot of length with blocking. I have just cast on for the hood, and I posted a fun little Instagram story like, oh, a traveler polo, because right now it kind of looks like a polo. I don't really know if I would go for this polo look, but it certainly is cute. Again, with the hood construction, totally new to me, so I'm just following the directions. I know there's a bit of short row shaping. Haven't really gotten to that yet, so I'm just knitting flat and following the stitch pattern. So it's been really fun. I haven't mentioned my needle size yet. I am knitting this on 4.5mm needles, which is 2 sizes up from the recommended. I tend to be a tight knitter, so this is what got me gauge based off of my gauge swatch. I have been getting recommendations that when I go ahead and knit the sleeves to do a pre-finished block because the sleeves grow a lot. So people have recommended to me to knit the sleeves but don't do the cuff, like skip the ribbing and kind of leave your live stitches on hold, block it and see how the sleeves grow, and then decide if you need to add or remove length for the sleeves before finishing with the cuff. So I'll probably do that just because it does have such a dramatic blocking transformation with the stitch pattern. And the sleeves are of course knit perpendicular to this fabric, so you're gonna have the same stretchy fabric but going like this way along the arm, so I can totally see that growing significantly. So this is my Traveler hoodie so far. Can't wait to continue working on it and share my progress with you all. Oh, also forgot to mention, with this new cabinet, I can finally have a place to mount my yarn ball winder, which is right at the edge of the camera frame, but what you can't see is also my Swift. So I've never had a permanent spot to put those things before, so I've always had to like take them out when I need them, like hook them up to my coffee table and then put them away, which was totally fine, but obviously it's so much more convenient to have them permanently up, so that was also a great addition to the craft space. My next project, this will be probably a quick update. This is my Sundown Shawl, which hasn't been on the podcast in a while, but I recently put it back on the needles and made a little bit of progress on it. It's so big. The Sundown Shawl is a pattern by Kristen Strucker Kellogg that was released in conjunction with Originally Lovely, and I am using Originally Lovely fluff to knit mine. It's just a really oversized blanket scarf shawl thing, like it's a big rectangle that has a really nice stitch pattern. It's very basic, but I think it's very effective. These are columns of ribbing and seed stitch or moss stitch and fake cables. So I'll show it a little bit more closely. So you can see those cables, it's actually just a traveling stitch that creates kind of the look of cables, but without doing the cables. And this is a big rectangle that will probably have some wrong side showing when being worn. So the wrong side looks pretty good too, because you just kind of have the same seed stitch and the same ribbing, and the cable columns are just purl columns. So a pretty effective shawl pattern. I'm making mine pretty large because I want it to be just a big cozy wrap that I can use on really cold days. Of course, I have not finished this yet, and even though we're still in really cold days, maybe by the time I finish this, the really cold days will have passed, but I'm sure future me will be really excited when this is done. So Originally Lovely fluff is an Aran weight, really nice baby alpaca yarn. It's a chainette blown yarn that is 70% baby alpaca and 7% merino wool, and then the chainette sort of tube is 23% polyamide. This is in the color Wolf, which is this really nice heathered brown color, and I'm knitting my shawl on 5.5mm needles, so it is feeling like it knits up pretty quickly. I have 8 balls of this to knit the shawl, and I've just finished the 4th ball. So believe it or not, I'm only halfway done, which to be honest, I'm like, I don't know if I need it twice this size. Like maybe I'll only use like 6 or 7 of the balls of yarn. My goal was just to knit it until I ran out of yarn, but this is pretty large. I can't picture myself making something double the size. At that point, I should just call it a blanket and keep it in our living room. But it's really soft. It's really cozy. I really like knitting with the yarn. I've used this style yarn a lot in recent projects, and it just creates such a really like scrumptious kind of luxury feeling fabric that is a bit different than standard like plied wools that I will usually opt for sweaters and stuff. It doesn't have like the greatest stitch definition, which you know, it can be a good thing or a bad thing. I think it just works really well in this garment. It has a really nice amount of drape and it's super lightweight and obviously incredibly warm. This pattern does also come in a small size, so I'm making the large size, but there is a small size, which is probably more akin to a real scarf. It's about half the width of the large size and uses about half the amount of yarn. So if you are interested in this project at all, I am an affiliate with Originally Lovely. I really recommend this yarn. I have a link in my description where you can shop for kits for either the small or the large size. This fluff yarn comes in a lot of beautiful colors and I can't recommend it enough. My next project is a new cast on, and that is the Inclinations Cowl, which is also an Andrea Mowry pattern. So I had this spin cycle in a different project. My Velvet Mirror Cowl was also an Andrea Mowry pattern, and it was a Colorwork tube cowl that was knit with some color changing spin cycle and a fluffy yarn. I had opted to use some undyed Surrey lace yarn. And that project I had started last summer, and I'd only gotten like a quarter of the way through the tube, and I never really wanted to work on it. Like, I did enjoy it for the little bit that I had an interest in it, but I really just lost interest, and I just knew I was not going to finish that project. So I also at the same time realized I wanted to knit another bias cowl by Andrea Mowry. I had spotted the Inclinations Cowl by Andrea Mowry, which uses 2 different colors of spin cycle, and I had the perfect quantity in stash for that project if I had frogged the Velvet Mirror Cowl. And I knew I just had more of an interest in that. I knew the Velvet Mirror Cowl was on its way out, so I just decided it was going to be best to frog that, reuse the yarn for this new project that I'm really excited about, and yeah, I think it was a really great decision. So the yarns that I have here, this was the yarn that I frogged from my Velvet Mirror Cowl. This is spin cycle dyed in the wool in the color Nostalgia. And this one has like mostly a dark maroon base, but a little bit of teal blue in there. And then I had this other spin cycle dyed in the wool in my stash, which is called Overshadow. I just had to remember the name real quick, which is a really pretty blend of blues and purples. And I thought these would go nicely together just because there's a little bit of teal in here that kind of plays off of the teal in this one. I mean, they're obviously very different colors, but the Inclinations Cowl is a half fisherman's rib cowl where you alternate every other row with the color changing yarn. And look at this. It looks so cool. I really love how these yarns are playing out together. I think the mesmerizing part of these projects is just that you don't know how the fabric is going to knit up, because looking at the yarn balls, they just look so different and you can't really tell how the colors will shift into one another. And that is something I remember really loving while knitting my Shift Cowl, and it's something I'm really loving while knitting this Inclinations Cowl. I'm knitting mine with size 3mm needles, and if you're unfamiliar with this construction of cowl, it's kind of like a big it's not a trapezoid, I think it's a pentagon, but it has like this shape. I'll probably put a picture on the screen of the shape of it, and you knit it from corner to corner, and then you seam it up the back. So it becomes a tube that has kind of like a triangle down the front, and it has enough fabric where it kind of bunches around the neck and looks really nice. And I just find these to be very practical accessories to wear in the winter because they perfectly fill in all of the gaps that you might have when you put on your winter coat, where your neck, and like if you have a buttoned coat, sometimes they don't really cover this top part of your neck, or if you have a zippered coat, same thing. So really practical and also just really fun to knit at the same time. So because I knit left-handed, I'm actually knitting in a mirror construction of how it's outlined in the pattern diagram. I think I've been holding this up the wrong way the whole time. There we go. So if you're right-handed, you'll actually knit it kind of in a way that looks like this. So you cast on here and you kind of work this way and it grows like this. But because I'm left-handed and all of my knitting is mirrored, I actually start with this corner and it's been growing in this direction. So this edge here is like the top of the neck, and you can see how it's growing down this way. And I just started where the angle kind of shifts. So this is gonna come down and create the point, and then it'll go back up and create like the other side, and then eventually it'll be long enough where this is the edge that gets seamed and will eventually sit at the back of my neck. So that's the construction. Andrea Mowry has a ton of different cowls with this construction. If you're looking for a project that is really engaging, but at the same time like easy to memorize and easy to take on the go, I would definitely recommend taking a look at her different cowls, like the Shift, Inclinations, the Traveler Cowl. Really fun to knit up. So here's a close-up of the right side of the fabric. I just love how the colors are playing off of each other. It's a little bit stripy, but if you look up close, it really blends, and it's just really fun. And of course, these are like some of my favorite colors to wear, the purple and the reds. I feel like it'll go with a lot of different outfits. So just really enjoying this. Even though it's half fisherman's rib, it doesn't really feel like a drag at all. It's just really fun. Spin Cycle is really expensive. I actually was gifted this from a store, and I actually found my other set of colors from a D-stash on Ravelry where I was able to buy it for less than the like market price. And if Spin Cycle is too expensive for you, I would highly recommend Shopple Wool. Has a few different yarns, including Zauberball and Edition 3 have kind of the same effect, but they are a lot more affordable. So definitely check those yarns out if you want kind of like a similar style with the color changing, but maybe Spin Cycle isn't in your budget. I'll link below some of those yarns. Alright, let's talk about my weekend last weekend as we shift into some new cast-ons and future plans and some new yarn. So last weekend I took a little road trip up to New Hampshire and Vermont. I wanted to go to Junction Fiber Mill, which is located in White River Junction, Vermont, as well as the Woolly Thistle, which is located in West Lebanon, New Hampshire. If you're unfamiliar with the geography of the area, those two towns are bordering each other right between the border of Vermont and New Hampshire. It's about 2 hours north of Boston. So it was a pretty easy day trip for me to take with my husband, and it was really fun. So Junction Fiber Mill is a woman-owned mill, and they will mill yarns for local sheep farmers. They will dye their own yarn and make their own yarn called Making Tracks, which is another alternative to Spin Cycle. It has a kind of similar color changing effect, and they have open houses about once a month, and last Saturday was their February open house, and I just really wanted to go, and I've never been to a yarn mill before, so I was really excited to go. They were of course selling their yarn at the open house as well as doing tours of the mill, so it was really cool to see the machinery. Unfortunately, they didn't allow any filming of the machinery, which totally respect, so if you're curious about their behind the scenes, they have a ton of content on their channels that you can look at. And specifically last Saturday, they were selling their new kind of limited edition yarn called Corriedale Confetti. So I was super excited to pick some up. Oh my goodness, look at this. So if I remember the story right, they purchased over 127 pounds of Corriedale from a sheep farmer at New York Sheep and Wool Festival that was in October. And they milled up all this beautiful yarn. So they blended, I believe, like 95% of the Corriedale with about 5% of merino. And then they added all this colorful dyed sari silk into the yarn and then created this Corriedale Confetti as they've labeled it. So I got this color, which is light gray, which was the little bit of black merino blended in with the Corriedale, and just look at that rainbow of colors. Absolutely gorgeous. And they also milled up a pink version, but I really liked the gray, so I was super excited to be able to shop this in person. I picked up 4 skeins, and they did have a pretty quick order of it on Tuesday this past week. I'm sure by the time that this video goes live it will have sold out. Unfortunately, it was like pretty limited and pretty in high demand for good reason, but I'm really glad I could pick some up in person. And this yarn is 190 yards per skein, and they were advertising it as a worsted weight yarn. I actually don't know if these are 100 gram skeins. I haven't weighed them yet, but I had the perfect idea for a pattern from my Nordic Knits magazine from Line of Publishing, and that is the Tuku Warmer Slipover. The Tuku Warmer Slipover is a garter stitch slipover that features a tall collar, and I just really liked the pattern, and I thought it would be the perfect way to showcase this yarn. Definitely wanted a simple stitch pattern. The slipover is at a worsted weight gauge, and I was able to meet gauge on 5.5mm needles. So here's my swatch of the Corriedale Confetti. It feels really nice. This is all blocked, and this yarn definitely smells like wool, but in like a really good way. Like it's not like a farmy smell, it's just like a fresh wool smell, which if you're a knitter, you might relate to, just like the smell of good wool. I'm just so excited to knit up this pattern. Like as soon as I got home, I was like, I need to cast on, I need to swatch. So I just barely started. The Slipover has a folded 2x2 collar, but they also have an option for a non-folded 1x1 ribbed collar. So that's what I'm doing. I kind of like the look of the non-folded 1x1 rib collar and still doing the 2x2 rib at the bottom. So this will be kind of like a fun project. You start with the collar, knit in the round, and then you actually knit the rest of the Slipover flat, and then you seam up the sides, which makes sense because it's garter stitch and you wouldn't really want to knit it in the round. Then you'd be doing purling every other round, and then the structural integrity of it might be a little bit shaky if it's like heavy and garter stitch, so the seam should give it a lot of structure. I'm going to be knitting size 1 for myself, and I might be playing some yarn chicken. I got 4 skeins of this at 190 yards each. That gives me a total of 760 yards, which I think is enough to knit the Slipover. So I might be cutting it close, might have to do kind of like a cropped Slipover situation, but should be okay with the 4 skeins of this yarn for the Slipover. Now, kind of funny, I was reading some project reviews of this pattern on Ravelry, and there was some controversy. People did not really like how this pattern was written. I guess it had a few errors when it was originally released. People were claiming in the comments that there was no way that this pattern had been tech edited or tested, to which the author responded that it was tech edited and it was tested. So we'll see how my experience is with the pattern. One tip that I don't think I've shared before in terms of having printed or published patterns that's not a digital copy where you can get emailed automatic updates for the pattern is to Google search for errata for your pattern if you think there's a mistake, because there might be a chance if your pattern was published a while ago that they've already resolved the mistake and have published it on the internet under the term errata, which is short or a different language for something with error. Of course, it has like a similar word structure. And that was actually something that I learned when I started learning how to knit in middle school when I was like 10 or 12. And I learned a lot of knitting from books because back then I just didn't really use the internet that much. I don't even know what YouTube was doing back then. It might have either not existed or was definitely nothing that my parents would let me use at the time. So because I learned to knit from a lot of books, I like quickly learned that looking up errata was the best way to see if the publisher had published corrections to a printed pattern. So I think for that pattern there might be some published errata online that I can look up if I think one of the stitch counts or something is wrong. That's a great tip in case you have encountered like in a book something that doesn't seem quite right. Give it a quick Google search and you might be able to find a correction. So that was the first stop that I made last weekend. Junction Fiber Mill was wonderful. If you ever want to visit and are close to the area, or maybe not close to the area and want to visit, they publish their open house schedule on their website. It's about once a month, but of course I'm sure it's subject to change, and I'm really excited to cast on with my Corriedale confetti. And my second stop of last weekend was the Woolly Thistle yarn shop, which is located in West Lebanon, New Hampshire, and I was super excited to visit. The Woolly Thistle is a yarn shop that specializes in high quality yarns, specifically from Europe and the UK. They really like woolly yarns, hence the name the Woolly Thistle, things that have a little bit of texture and are great for colorwork projects, keeping you extra warm, and just really good quality wools. As someone who fell in love with Santa's Garn Pure Gint last year, and also someone who really enjoyed knitting with just some yarns that had a little bit of toothiness to them without being prickly. Like whenever I say a yarn is like toothy, I just mean it has like, you can run your finger across it and it has a little bit of texture or like toothiness, but nothing that like is sharp, or for me, they haven't really been itchy. And I've just been really enjoying diving into more of those types of yarns while still keeping a strong love for soft merinos and stuff like that. But the Woolly Thistle was a great shop to visit because they stocked a lot of yarns that I've heard of and I've heard great things of, but I've never been able to shop in person and feel them, such as Tuku wool, which is a Finnish yarn brand. They have have Tuku wool fingering and Tuku wool DK. They also stock a lot of Rauma yarns, which I've never purchased or knit with before. I was lucky enough to be able to feel some Rauma when I was in Norway traveling a few years back, but they carry Rauma Fennel garn, which comes in a wide variety of different colors, as well as Rauma Fivel or Fivel, not sure how to pronounce it, but those yarns are really highly regarded for color work and just having a great texture and warmth to them. They also carry the full line of colors, or what seemed like the full line. I don't know, there was a lot of colors from Jameson and Smith, as well as Jameson and Shetland, which I recently learned are different brands. They also carry a lot of Lopi yarns, including Plata Lopi, which is their unspun yarn. So if you're into any of those woolly yarns, I would definitely recommend visiting the Woolly Thistle, or at least visiting their website. They have a ton of samples as well, so you can feel the texture of the sweaters after they've been blocked and how the fabric drapes. And they also, in addition to yarn, of course, have a great stock of notions. They stock my favorite Chaogu needle sets, as well as individual Chaogu needles and books. And I had a purpose. My goal for visiting the Woolly Thistle was to pick up yarn for my first Colorwork sweater. Okay, wait, I'm lying. So I have knit a Colorwork cardigan before out of Alafas Lopi. I totally forgot about that project because I actually didn't end up wearing it, and I actually ended up selling it to another knitter who I hope is really appreciating it for what it is. But I do want to incorporate into my knitting more color work and just have more color work garments that I'm actually excited to wear. I'd been eyeing some patterns from this book Arctic Knits by Wai-Chen Chan, who used to be the petite knitter on Instagram, but recently they updated their Instagram and company name to Sasky & Co. This book is full of beautiful colorwork sweaters, things that seem pretty beginner friendly because they're all circular yoke top-down sweaters, which tend to be a little bit simpler for beginner colorwork newbies like me. So I was eyeing a pattern called the Pingo Jumper, which is a 2-color sweater that uses a DK weight yarn, and I also was eyeing the Baffin Jumper, which is a similar 2-color colorwork sweater that instead uses fingering weight yarn. And I just really wanted to see what they had at the store and figure out what colors I thought would go best together. I was trying out a lot of different combos, and this is what I ended up picking out. So I really liked the texture of the Tuku wool fingering, and as well as the Tuku wool DK, but the color selection for the Tuku wool fingering I just liked a little bit more, and I really wanted to use this green color. I actually don't know how to pronounce this name. I think it's called Vita, but it's just this beautiful, really bright kind of clover emerald green, and it has a lot of heathering in it. You can see it kind of has some streaks of black, which gives it some texture. It feels very smooth, but definitely has that bit of like roughness, a little bit grippy, but still like not scratchy at all. Just it has a beautiful woolly texture. And I really wanted to try this emerald green color because it is something that is in my color palette and I haven't really knit with before. I tend to go for either more of the blue greens or the dark greens, but this one, I don't even know what chip it best matches, but it's somewhere close to there. I was trying not to be basic and just get like a white yarn to go with it. So I thought it'd be fun to go with like this black yarn, which I also don't know how to pronounce the name, but it's a very heathered black. It almost leans kind of brown. It's not like a true deep charcoal black. And in the store, I thought they looked good together. I mean, black and any color I feel like would go well together. But then when I got home, and I cast on for a swatch, I realized I didn't really like it. So here's the swatch, and it looks really cute on camera. Of course, I had to swatch flat with the color work, and I wanted my gauge to be accurate, so have all the little fiddly bits over here, but I realized that this is like a medium contrast color combo, and I think for my first colorwork sweater, I really want a high contrast, so I kind of regret not doing like a white and a green. But that's the pattern from the Baffin Jumper, which is for the fingering weight, so that's what I intend to make, and I think it's not going to look bad, but I just don't feel in love with it. So luckily I have an alternative. So my alternative, I actually have more yarn from the Woolly Thistle from that trip. So Rambler is their in-house yarn brand. So they work specifically with a mill to create this yarn. This is a fingering weight yarn that is 80% Dorset, 10% Corriedale, and 10% Romney. There's 420 yards in these 100 gram skeins. This is in the color Natural, and this is a really nice wool yarn. It's a bit smoother and less rough than the Tuku wool, but still has like a beautiful kind of grip to it. It just feels really nice, and I can just imagine what this will block like after soaking it in water and some wool wash. I feel like it's going to be a really nice wool yarn. And then I also have this color Lake, which is a beautiful blue. Now, the Woolly Thistle advertises this as being a great sock yarn, so I'm really curious to see how that will go because there's no nylon in here. It's not a superwash wool, so I've never knit like a 100% wool non-superwash sock, so I'm curious to try that and see how they hold up. So I have this, and I think I'm going to use this as my contrasting color in the Baffin Jumper rather than the black. Although now that I'm looking at the black on the camera, it does look really nice. There's something about it in person that's just not sticking with me. This is my alternative, the green and the white. Of course, I don't see any issue with this color combo at all. It is a higher contrast than the black and the green. So, I don't know. What do you guys think? Should I just stick with my original plan with the black and green or go with the natural and the green? Let me know. So that's the beginning of my journey on my first Colorwork sweater. I do really want to start it, hence why I really want to finish my Ingrid so I can sort of give myself the opportunity to cast on some new projects. In addition to the yarns at the Woolly Thistle, I got a few goodies. So they did give me this cute little tote bag with their logo on it. This is a Scottish thistle that they've sort of used as their logo. Super cute. They gave me some stitch markers. Look at the sticker. Let me open this up. Oh, cute, cute. So the tin is mostly just plain ring stitch markers, like nothing fancy in there, but there is one cute little locking stitch marker. Oh, look at the sheep. That is adorable. Some stickers in here. Oh, and I also got a Junction fiber mill sticker when I was there. They were just giving them out for free, which is really nice, so gotta put those somewhere. I definitely am someone who has sticker commitment issues where I don't use my stickers because I don't want them to be permanent, but I think I'm just gonna start putting them on a water bottle, like all my knitting theme stickers. So I will share that I'm really excited to be an affiliate with the Woolly Thistle. I'm really excited to start using a lot of their yarns in my projects this year. Their website does ship everywhere. They actually started as a online only site, and their in-store retail shop has been kind of like a new addition to their company, which is really exciting. Their shipping policies are pretty nice. Like if you spend more than $99, they'll give you free shipping within the US. And if you spend less than that, it's only $4.95 for US shipping. So definitely check out their website. I will link my affiliate link below. Thank you again. If you choose to use my affiliate links, I really appreciate the support. And if you're in the area, definitely recommend a visit to the Woolly Thistle. And that brings us to the end of today's episode. If you made it to the end, thank you so much for joining me and listening to me talk about my knitting projects and yarns that are just making me really excited. It's been a pleasure sharing them with you today. Feel free to subscribe if you want to keep up with all of my latest videos, and feel free to give me a follow on Instagram where you can find me at ne_knits. Spring is somehow just around the corner, so I will hopefully be putting out some new spring inspiration content for you all. But in the meantime, you can check out my spring content from last year, as I'm sure the pattern suggestions and inspiration still applies. Hope to see you in the next video. Bye.